The executive summary for baiting enemies to your defenses is to hold open doors to create a path into the main living area of your base and have lots of pieces of furniture in a bait area. Zonable animals like squirrels or rats, and even trainable animals like Labradors, rhinos, and thrumbos no longer function as viable bait that will bait in entire enemy raids. A single pathable colonist can bait an entire standard enemy raid. A large amount of pathable furniture may not bait an entire standard enemy raid, but it will usually lure most. The more bait furniture, the better. This guide does not apply to breachers, sappers, and manhunter packs. Those use different mechanics. A reasonable understanding of the targeting and pathing mechanics of standard enemies in Rimworld is that each enemy chooses, path towards, and attacks their own target. A more detailed understanding is that enemies go through a 7-step process. 1. Check if a sample of junk targets is pathable. 2. Check if any active combatant is pathable. 3. Check if another sample of junk targets is pathable. 4. Check if another sample of junk targets is pathable. 5. Attack a random structured target. 6. If the chosen target is either made unpathable or destroyed, restart again from step 1. 7. At any point in time, some target overrides, like deciding to light some crops on fire, may mean the enemy skips those first 6 steps entirely and does something else. Standard enemies do not target wealth. Standard enemies do not choose the path of least resistance. Standard enemies do not target bedrooms. Standard enemies are doing these 7 steps. To better understand what these 7 steps mean, we need to get into some details.
Pathable means that the enemy can walk to the exact same cell. This colonist is pathable. The enemy can obviously walk to the same square. Held open doors, fences, and similar do not prevent pathing. The colonist is still pathable. Long and winding path, giant maze, still pathable. Closed door, not pathable. Closed doors prevent enemy pathing. Deep water, not pathable. Even though the enemy and the colonist can shoot each other, this colonist is no longer pathable. The enemy must be able to walk to the same cell. Rimworld considers some potential targets differently when determining targeting and pathing. Some things can be in multiple target types. These are not comprehensive lists. Active combatants. A single active combatant can lure in an entire enemy raid on its own. A colonist 14 or older that is not downed is an active target. It doesn't matter if it's sleeping. A powered turret is an active combatant. Enemies, humans of a hostile faction. For example, these attacking pirates are enemies of this civil outlander caravan. These caravan humans are all active combatant targets for the pirates. Insects, sleeping doesn't matter. Manhunters. Awakened mechs and awakened mech turrets. Sleeping does matter for mechs. With the Biotech DLC, a child with a weapon. A non-dormant mech. Recharging at the recharging station counts. Self-recharging, that is dormant, that does not count. Inactive combatants. These are not targeted directly and cannot lure in entire raids on their own. Inactive combatants will be relevant when we discuss target overrides. Inactive combatants include zonable animals like squirrels, labradors, thrumbos, rats. Downed colonists. Unpowered turrets. Mortars. Dormant mechs. Infants. Furniture and junk targets. These can be targeted, but a single piece of furniture will not always lure in every enemy. Some things, like unpowered turrets, are both inactive combatants and junk targets. Structure targets. These are only targeted if no other targeted is found. Farm animals that can only be put into pastures or tied to caravan spots aren't targeted at all. There are circumstances where enemies can bump into farm animals and melee fight them. Back
to the 7-step process for more details. The moment standard raiders attack, they choose their target. For immediate attack enemies, that's the moment they spawn onto the map. That immediate targeting means you need your pathable bait ready all the time. Prepare for a while attacks don't choose their target until they switch from wander around to assaulting the colony. Each enemy goes through this 7-step process individually and chooses their own target. Multiple enemies can choose the same target. Each singular enemy checks if it can path at a sample of some junk targets. We don't know the exact sampling mechanics, but we do know that not all junk targets are checked. If nothing is found in the first step, then the singular enemy checks if each enemy active combatant is pathable. This is why a single pathable colonist can lure in all enemies. Every single enemy checks every active combatant in step 2. Then there are 2 more sampled checks of junk targets. We're not sure if 2 checks rather than 1 matters here. What does matter is lots of junk targets are checked, but not all junk targets are checked. That's why we recommend lots of furniture, and sometimes furniture doesn't work. The more junk furniture you have as bait, the more likely enemies will take the bait. If nothing is found in those first 4 steps, then the enemy chooses a random pathable player-controlled structure like a wall or door. Enemies attacking walls is a potentially exploitable combat mechanic. Hopefully, we will get into concepts like too thick outer walls and ambush tactics in another video. If the initial target is either made unpathable or is destroyed, we start over from the top, step 1, and repeat through everything. This repeat step also has fantastic combat implications because you can bounce enemies back and forth by hiding and revealing different targets. We call this concept resetting, and hopefully we can get into more depth on this one another time. Then there are target overrides. Enemies don't necessarily stay locked on to their initially chosen target. There are target overrides that allow enemies to acquire a new target even if their current target is still viable. We do not know the exact mechanics of many of these target overrides. An enemy that nears a combatant, active or inactive, may switch to that combatant as a target. Sometimes you can pop outside of a door and cause an enemy bashing a wall to retarget to your exposed colonist. Doing damage to the enemy will virtually always do the trick to get the enemy to switch targets. Enemies won't path through a complicated maze to an unarmed child or to a zonable animal, but if they see a child or zonable animal, they will attack that child or zonable animal. The patch that changed children being targets also changed zonable animals. Some enemies may light things on fire as a target override. Human enemies may light crops, wooden walls, wooden furniture, exposed conduit, and similar things on fire rather than pathing at a target. An enemy with a frag grenade may decide to throw their grenade at a wall. This grenade throwing is for standard enemies with grenades and not just sappers or breachers. An enemy near a powered turret may be baited towards the turret. The attraction of powered turrets is very strong and can lure enemies off of junk targets. This powered turret baiting is especially useful against center drops. An enemy may bash a door if it sees its target go through a door. Door bashing most often happens if within 6 tiles. Sometimes the range is much longer and we are not entirely sure why. I have some details and a link below on exactly how you can investigate this topic. Anytime an enemy takes damage, they retarget. Notably, melee enemies always choose the nearest possible target every time they take damage. If you are fighting a melee enemy, you can have a runner that you always keep closer to the enemy than your shooters. As long as the runner is the closest target, the melee enemy chases the runner. Here, the thrumbo stays on the runner because the runner is always closer to the thrumbo. Here, the runner was further away than the shooters when the Thrumbo took damage, so the Thrumbo attacked the shooters. Quick bonus tip for animals: they flee from nearby ranged fire. You can split up scary herds of animals or scare away predators by firing at a sleeping spot or other similar spots. And honestly, for this 7-step more detailed process, it's not perfectly accurate. Rimworld is actually vastly more complicated. The game's code is available to us mere players. Here's some info on how you can look through the files and the code. Info in the description as well. I have done my best to understand the code myself, test things in development mode, and translate what I think I learned into practical information. There are surely things I have missed, not understood, or gotten wrong. The practical understanding of all this info is pretty simple. Take your base, put a wall around it. Closed doors in the wall are just fine. Standard enemies see closed doors the same way they see walls. Have one opening in the outer wall. The opening could be a held open door. Put your defenses right there next to the opening. Put your bait behind the defenses. Ideally, have open doors all the way into your base because a colonist can lure in every enemy. Also, have a large pile of junk furniture targets like stools, tables, shelves, or similar. Remember, even lots of junk may not lure in every enemy. A note on powered turrets: a single powered turret can bait every single enemy. However, you may not wish to use a powered turret as bait. Powered turrets cause an issue with collision. Collision is the mechanic that causes enemies to stack or unstack. If a powered turret is pathable anywhere in your base, ranged enemies may not gain collision. A more complete and detailed video on collision is here and linked below. If you do want powered turrets in your kill box, you may want to turn them off until enemies gain collision and then turn them on. Unpowered turrets are considered junk furniture targets like tables, beds, lights, shelves, etc. Target prioritization system in Rimworld. I haven't investigated how targets are prioritized very much. As said moments ago, a single opening leading to appropriate bait is going to lure every single enemy. So target prioritization isn't all that practical. I believe there is a priority system for active combatants. Enemies generally choose the closest target by straight line ignore pathing distance. Here's a silly example. I believe there is not a priority system for junk targets, like furniture. 7 wooden stools attract as many enemies as 7 colonist beds, or even 7 golden legendary grand sculptures. Switch the positions and compositions on these junk targets, and we get the same results. Enemies check a random sample of junk furniture, and they treat all junk furniture targets the same. No prioritization of junk furniture targets. And let's do an example of pathing for some clarity. Here's our base. Currently, we have a held open door to a few small number of junk targets. There are currently no pathable active combatants because all our colonists are behind closed doors and thus unpathable. We have a dormant mech defoliator ship surrounded by sleeping mechs on the other side of the map. If we do nothing, we only have junk targets pathable. If an immediate attack raid of, let's say, tribals appeared, some enemies would choose the junk furniture as targets, and some enemies will attack random walls and doors because those junk targets weren't found in their random sample of furniture. No enemies will attack the mechs because they are still asleep. To ensure more enemies take the bait and don't attack random walls, ideally we'd hold open the doors to our base all the way to a colonist. If there's some reason we can't do that, like perhaps it's too cold in winter, we probably just want to add more junk furniture targets. Let's add a lot more junk. Now, a huge portion of immediate attack tribal enemies will take the bait and only a few would attack random walls and doors. We do have a mortar. We can get the enemies to fight the mechs if we want. In order to do that, it's probably best to keep everything as is at first. That way, we don't have awakened mechs on the map ready to cause problems. When we get attacked, immediately run to the mortar and aim at the mechs. When the mechs awaken, close the door to our junk targets. Remove all of our pathable targets after we have created new targets somewhere else. Closing the door removes all of our targets from being pathable. When the door closes, the enemies will hesitate for a moment, retarget, then attack their new pathable targets. After the enemies engage, we probably want to reopen our door. Now, whichever side wins will take our pathable bait and come right into our defenses. And that's the basics of standard enemy pathing in Rimworld. Thanks for being here. I'm Mortal Smurf. Have a great day.